There we go. Now we're live.
Whew, you made it work.
Oh, it's always a stressor, like for the first 30 seconds, because there's such a delay, you know?
Hey guys, it's good to see you. I hope you're good. We already have a few people in the chat. We have Victor, Frank, and did I say somebody else? Oh well. Anyways, hi. Hope you're all good in your corners of the world. Ryan, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System. We're going to really nerd out today.
Okay.
So many of our tech talks have been kind of high level. This one's going to get really down in the weeds.
It's been a week since Ryan and I have this conflict. I'm trying to make it a little more accessible for people. Today we're going to talk about how GPS work, how the GPS system work. And you're like, it's not GPS, it's GNSS.
This is where my techie mind and Sophie's marketing mind don't agree. Well, before we start, can everybody hear us?
I think so.
Yeah?
Hi everybody, we have Anton, Dave, Robert, Keith. It's good to see you all. This is going to be another one of our fun evenings.
I hope so. Yeah, let's dive in, I think. We'll just go.
Oh, Julian and Tenny are here.
Awesome.
On time.
Awesome. All right.
So if you're new to those lives, what's happening is that Ryan presents, I am in the chat taking questions, and I try to do a little bit of housekeeping and keeping the question until it's relevant. And so just pop your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them.
All right, let's rock and roll. So today we're going to dive into how does GPS, or in other words, how does the GNSS system. So many times we refer to the GPS as an all-encompassing thing, but really GPS is the American system for how we navigate with satellites from space. And so the kind of high-level name for that is GNSS, or Global Navigation Satellite System. And GPS is a piece of that, so that's why I have 2 bits there, and that's why Sophie and I have a little conflict on the name of this tech talk. But I digress. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what GNSS is, and then how does it work, which is kind of the premise of the whole thing. We'll talk a bit about augmentations, and what an augmentation even is, some of the limitations of GNSS and the future of GNSS, and we take your questions along the way. And any questions Sophie has too.
Yeah,
she learns as we go.
Yeah, I actually do.
So I said GNSS, GPS is the US system of GNSS, and it was really the first system that was developed all the way back in the 60s and 70s, but went online in the 80s and 90s. That's the Global Positioning System. Then the Russians have theirs, GLONASS. The European system is coming online called Galileo, and I have to remove my face for a second. The Chinese have theirs called Beidou.
Yeah.
Is that what we determined it was?
It's not spelled the same way as it was last week when we did the live.
Well,
I'm confused.
It's hard to translate those little the Chinese characters.
Right.
Google doesn't always get it right. So these are the 4 systems. India also has a system. I forget the name off the top of my head, and a number of other countries are implementing their own. Some of them are regional. India's system is regional. Others of them are global. But for obvious strategic military reasons, many nations don't want to be dependent on the US for navigation systems, and so they're launching their own. So there are more systems, and the way that a lot of the allied nations work is that a receiver that uses GPS should be able to use Galileo and others, and I'll have some examples of that. So some of them will be able to co-work together and use other satellites. Others will not, and it depends on the age of your system. So how does GNSS work? And there's really 3 parts to the whole puzzle. And from a technical point of view, we can get like really down to the weeds, and GNSS is actually extremely technical on how they launch the satellites and how the satellites orbit and how the data comes down, the radio waves come down to your receiver. We're not going to get that far in the weeds, but the basic technical pieces of how GNSS works are actually pretty simple. So there's three main components of GNSS or GPS, which we'll just use that because it's simpler right now. And that's the space segment. So obviously that's anything up in space. The control segment, which is a ground piece of infrastructure that's there, quite a few pieces, and then the user segment. And all of these three pieces have their own place in the whole system and their own importance. So we'll talk about those independently. And so if you just, if you see some good questions, just
I will
throw them out.
Nothing so far. I have a feeling that this subject is so technical and so deep that the amount of question might be
limited?
A little
okay,
lower.
well, we'll just go. Okay, so the space segment. Typically, so every system will be a little bit different, but the US system and most of them will have about 24 satellites that make up the constellation of satellites for the GNSS system. Now, that doesn't mean there's only 24 satellites in space. Currently, the GPS system has, I think, around 33 satellites. So there's redundant satellites that are up there that can take the position if one satellite is bad or goes bad. So many of these systems have redundant satellites, and they continually launch new satellites into orbit to replace satellites that are past their life cycle. But it takes about 24 satellites to make up the constellation. And there's then a number of orbital planes which these satellites go around, and that's shown in the pictures that you see there. But what's important to understand is these satellites aren't stationary above the Earth. That would be a geostationary orbit. They're actually in low Earth orbit, so they're continually moving. So if I stand and look at the sky, you'd see these satellites continually passing over. And for the GPS system, their orbital time is about a half a day. So they do 2 orbits in a day, and that's how fast they're moving. But they're about 11,000 miles above the surface, and this is important for later. So you have all these satellites. Now, at any one time, a user should be able to see 12 satellites. That's what the system is designed for. And for us on ships in the middle of the ocean, we should be able to see 12 satellites because we shouldn't have anything blocking the view of the sky. So we should be able to see all the way down to the horizon. Now, if you're hiking in the mountains or if you're in an aircraft that ends up flying low, you have things that obscure the sky. If you're in the city, you have buildings in the way, and that can cause the receiver and the user segment to not see as many satellites. But for us on our boats in the ocean, that shouldn't be as big of a problem. So as I said, these satellites are flying around the Earth, and they make orbit, one orbit twice a day. That's actually a really weird way to phrase that.
One orbit.
It should be 2 orbits
per day.
Per day.
Yeah.
But I phrased that weird. Another thing to understand, though, is with these satellites, the signal that it's sending out is really weak. So how weak is it? It's the equivalent of trying to look at a 25-watt light bulb from a 10,000 nautical miles. So if you're looking up into space at one of these satellites and there's a little 25-watt light bulb, that's the signal strength. So it's not very strong. And that's why it's really important for us on our boats to make sure the GNSS antennas are installed correctly. So that's why sometimes even if you have the antenna underneath the deck, like maybe inside the galley or at the nav station, that signal is weak and doesn't always come in. And it's good to have that antenna up on maybe an arch or on the top of the mast to get a good clear view of the sky. So an example for us is that we have an Iridium Go on board, and that has positioning data in it. And it does have an external antenna, but that's only to do communications with the satellites that are above. It has a separate GNSS antenna to communicate with the GPS system. but that antenna doesn't flow through the external antenna. It can only get that through the unit inside. And so sometimes our Iridium Go, when it's tracking us, and any of you who look on our website and watch us sometimes, the line will jump all over like crazy because it's getting a bad signal and it's telling us bad position data. So it's a really, really weak signal. The last important bit for the space segment, there's lots of things with the satellites. There's solar panels to power them. There's radio transmitters and receivers. But the big thing on board these satellites is there's 4 pretty large atomic clocks on board each of these satellites. So each satellite has 4 atomic clocks. They're big. They're super, super accurate. Like, I don't know, it goes down to some 10th of 100th of millisecond value in terms of accuracy. So, yeah, and that's really important for later when we talking more about how it works. So that's the space segment. We got all these satellites floating around above us. The second segment is going to be the control segment. So we can't just launch these satellites into space and let them float around without keeping an eye on their health, an eye on the atomic clocks, and then also some maybe position updating or moving satellites around. So this is how the U.S. ground control system works. The main master control station is in Colorado at Schriever Air Force Base. And then there's a number of other stations around the world. There's monitoring stations that are essentially like little GPS units on the ground that are monitoring the signals that are coming in. There's transmitting stations or ground antennas that are communicating with the satellites above. And those have to be placed all over the world because we can't just have that in the US because contrary to popular belief, the Earth is not flat.
Popular belief.
You know, like the flat earthers?
Oh my goodness.
You know?
Let's not go there.
Okay. So what this ground control system does, as I kind of alluded to, is it's keeping an eye on the position and updating the position information for the satellites, but it's also making sure the atomic clocks are constantly updated. Here's an interesting fact for you. Ooh. I just discovered, I'm going to change here. I just discovered before we came on, is that the time, the atomic clock time in the GPS, it would be the GPS satellites, is not the same time as like UTC time.
Okay.
It's not. It has its own atomic clock time, and then the GPS system will like add the difference. Yes, this is true, because apparently every few years we have to like add or subtract seconds from UTC time because the world doesn't spin like perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, but the GPS system just goes on its own time.
Okay.
They never update, like they don't put in leap seconds.
Does it make sense for us to have an atomic clock on the boat?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay. Onward. Any questions, honey?
Yeah, there is a couple of questions so far. Atukora asked, does cloud cover interfere with signals? And how is Starlink going to change GPS?
How is what?
How is Starlink going to change GPS?
It's a good question. Okay, both good questions. So,
there are always good questions.
There are always good questions.
You never say that a question is a bad question.
No, but we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose our awesome audience. No, but they are good questions. Cloud cover, in theory, shouldn't interfere with the GPS signal, which is a good thing for you because when we're all flying on those airplanes, all the modern airplanes are generally using GPS to navigate. That said, I suppose in like a really heavy storm or something, but like with a lot of moisture in the air, it could, but cloud cover should not interfere. And personally, just like flying in the clouds with my plane, I've never experienced that being a problem, so no. Where you could see issues is like driving your car in the city, in the buildings obviously, but if there's a lot of tree cover and you're driving on a lot of trees, like if it's big thick trees, that obviously would act like a wooden building and that could cause signal degradation. So that's a good question, but it shouldn't. The cloud cover should not. The other question was Starlink. So for those of you who don't know, Starlink is this Elon Musk, let's provide the world with internet project, and they're launching, I think, 3,000 satellites or something crazy like that. There's not even 3,000 satellites around the Earth right now. And I think they just had another flight the other day. But that system is there to provide internet communications. So its purpose is not positioning information, although I suppose depending on how those systems are built, it could do that, but I don't know the details. So as far as I'm aware, that's just positioning data. Just like if you have an Iridium Go and you're communicating to the Iridium Go, you're not getting position information like the GPS provides. You're simply, what's wrong?
You have rustling on your mic.
Oh, sorry. There we go. That's not providing position information. It's simply providing communication. So information you're uplinking or information you're bringing down. Okay. So what's happened? There we go. So that's the control segment. Then the last bit is the user segment. So this is everything from the GPS that you have in your phone to the chart plotter that you're using to, well, your watch to, like missiles or, do I need to change this?
Yeah, apparently your sound is bad.
Oh.
Sorry guys, this is live. We have to deal with the technicalities of it. Is it better, or do we still have the screeching sound? No. Okay.
Is it still bad?
Let's change this guy.
Oh.
All right, guys.
Sorry, stand by for one moment. We're gonna lose the sound. There we go. Is that any better? I hope so.
Okay, yeah, sound has been... I'm sorry, guys. The battery in the receiver of our mics was starting to get low. Ryan was like, should we change the battery? I was like, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, I actually tried to get ahead of that one, and I was told no.
It's my fault. Sorry.
All right, so the user segment. This is, yeah, again, everything from the cell phone to maybe military applications to, you know, in your car or whatever. Now, Sophie asked, do we need to have an atomic clock in those devices? And the thing is we're going to talk about next how this all comes together and work. And in theory, the time is the most important piece of this whole puzzle. So it would be nice to have atomic clocks on all these devices, but it's not practical because these clocks are so big. So I'll explain what we do instead. So we just have basic clocks in these devices, and then we put all the atomic clocks up into space because it's cheaper or something. All right, so any other questions? This is how it actually works.
Yeah, Jules's head hurts. He asks if you have any grog.
Okay.
It's a private joke.
Anything else? No, okay.
Silas asked if we could back up before the sound issue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can do that.
I don't remember where we were.
I don't know.
Man.
We'll just go back to this space segment. Since the sound was bad, guys, really sorry about that. I'll just recap this. So the space, we have three segments: the space, the control, and the user segment. The space segment is all the satellites that are flying around above us. So there's 24 satellites that make up the system, but in space we might have more than 30, and some of those are backup or redundant satellites. And those are made up of different orbits that are going around the Earth. Okay, so each satellite that go around the Earth twice a day. That's how fast they're moving. On each of those satellites are going to be 4 atomic clocks, and I'll explain why that's important in a second. But the signal that's coming from the satellite, and this is also very important, is very weak. So it's like looking at a 25-watt light bulb from 10,000 miles away. So very hard to see, very weak, but we can still get the signal. So that's the space segment. The control segment is a big system that we have around the Earth, and this could be satellites that are communicating with the, satellite dishes on the ground communicating with the satellites. There's other areas that have receivers on the ground that are making sure that the information that's being sent is healthy and good. And then there's some control stations that have big computers that are processing all of this information and then sending updates to the satellite, like updating the atomic clocks when and if that's needed. So that's the control segment. In the U.S., the Air Force oversees that. So a lot of times it's military pieces. And then we have the user segment. So that's all of our phones and our chart plotters and everything else that we use from day to day that we get position data from.
So someone asked if in the event the boat is in trouble, how do you send your GPS location for help?
Sorry, having a little... I'll get back to that one.
All right.
Okay. So...
oh, do I need to change the battery? Oh my God, there's a lot of battery changing
there's a lot
today.
this is our technical skills today are not very good. So, okay, how does all of this work? So it really depends on three things, but the biggest bit is, it actually works now, honey. It's on now, so I don't know if it just timed out.
It's fine.
So the way this all works is we need to derive a distance from the satellite. So it's all based on distance. We just need to know how far away we are from all these satellites, and based on that we can triangulate or find our actual position on any surface. So to do that, we get very basic formula here, which is our distance equals the velocity, and the velocity, because it's a radio wave, is going to be the speed of light. So that's fixed. We know that that's fixed. And the speed there is right at the bottom of that slide. And then the time. So the time at which the signal leaves the satellite and hits the receiver. Now, things are going at the speed of light, and since light can travel over such a vast distance so quickly, those satellites are very close in relation to that. So the time has to be extremely accurate, and that is why we have these atomic clocks on board. So if the time is off just by like a fraction of a second, it can throw the position that the GPS system is telling us that we're at off by quite a bit. So for those who use celestial navigation and calculating longitude, know that in the old days we used, well, even today we can use time to calculate longitude, and the time, if it's off, can really cause problems. So that's the issue. So in order to calculate that basic formula, we have to know a few things. So we need to know where the satellite is. And for that, we have almanac data. So the GPS, the basic GPS that you have on your phone or on a chart plotter will know, okay, I'm communicating with satellite number, I think in the diagram here we had satellite number 11. And it knows, okay, satellite number 11 is in this orbital plane, and it generally passes over my kind of known position at around this time. So that's the almanac data. That's where it is. So these positions are actually quite precise. Now, so that's generally. Now, we need to know the exact position. So the almanac data gives us a general position, and then the, if I can say this word right, infirmis data gives us the exact position. So when the satellite sends down its signal, it's got a couple different codes embedded within it, and one of them is its precise position information. So when the GPS sends down its signal, the receiver takes that and says, okay, well, I know you're generally at this position, but you're telling me you're updating that position, so now I know exactly where you are. And then in that code that it's sending down, it's also sending time information. So based on the time that it took to go down to the receiver, to my cell phone here, then we can figure out, well, where might we be? This is a little complicated. I can back up, but I'm going to go forward because I think this will help. So let's start with satellite 1 here. I'm going to get my little laser pointer out. Okay, so I hope people can see that. So satellite 1 here, I'm sitting somewhere on the Earth, and satellite 1 sends down some information. It's Infirmus data and it's time data embedded in a code. The receiver gets it and it says, okay, I am 10,500 miles away from satellite 1. All right. Now, that doesn't tell us anything other than we are 10,500 miles away from satellite 1. So we can draw a circle around satellite 1 at 10,500 miles. And at this point, we know we are anywhere on that blue line, which tells us nothing. Okay? So now we need to get a hold of another satellite to help us kind of narrow down where we are. And that's where satellite 2 comes into place. So we do the same thing with satellite 2. And I say, okay, I am now maybe 11,000 miles from satellite 2. So we draw a big circle around satellite 2, and where those points intersect, so you see the blue line and the green line here, where those points intersect are the possible places that we could be. So in this scenario, there's two places that we could be. So that gets us closer, but it's not close enough because those 2 points could actually be very, very far apart. So we need a third satellite to narrow it down even more. And that's where satellite 3 comes in. So we repeat the process. So satellite 3 is going to send down its position information and the time information. Our receiver picks it up, says, okay, we're 10,300 miles away. Okay, so we draw a big circle around satellite 3, and now, boom, we know the spot that we are. And that's how it works.
Wow.
Except, not really. Because we don't live in a 2-dimensional world. We live in a 3-dimensional world.
How do you know? Sorry.
Because the Earth is not flat. So if you look to the left here, you'll see that these circles should actually be big spheres, and it's really hard to demonstrate how the spheres are going to interact in a 2-dimensional presentation like this. But we can essentially just repeat the whole process. So if we're at mean sea level, which hopefully most of our boats are, we can actually use 3 satellites to get a position because we have no elevation involved. But if we're taking our GPS receivers in an airplane, or we're going up a mountain, or maybe we're even going down in a submarine, we actually have to operate in a 3D space. And that's why in this photo to the left, you actually need 4 satellites. So 3 is not good enough because when we, on this 2D picture here, as I get this point, there's actually 2 points we could be. We could be 1 point, we could be 1 point here, but we could also be 1 point up in space. So we need a 4th satellite to figure out where we are in the 3 dimensions. Does that make sense?
It actually does make sense. I'm like, wow, I had no idea. I'm learning with you guys. I know nothing about those things.
So that's the basics of how it works. There's some signals that come down, and it's giving us time information and location information, which is the 2 most vital things that we have. And then based on that, we're able to find a distance from each satellite, draw some circles, and say, okay, we are right here. Yeah? Any questions on that, you think?
Yes.
Okay.
Stone Martini asked, does buying a cheaper unit sacrifices accuracy? Or is it more an issue of quality and maybe sooner and easier to break? And by the way, thanks Stone Martini for the super chat. It was awesome.
So the answer is maybe. So if you just want to go out hiking and, just have basic GPS information, the answer is no. It doesn't matter if you buy a cheap one or an expensive one. It all revolves around the other options that it has, and we can talk a little bit about that. We can talk about that a little bit more later. But just to get position information, it doesn't matter. The GPS receiver inside of your phone is probably quite a cheap GNSS receiver, but the phone isn't. But it does a bunch of other stuff. Where it starts to get expensive is if you need to rely on the receiver for mission critical things. So in an airplane, the receivers need to do a few more things and be much more accurate, and they do that through different ways, and we're going to talk about that later, than what your phone does. So you're going to want to have not only one GNSS receiver, but maybe 3 of them on board a plane. And the same thing goes with, you know, tanker ships and submarines and warships. They all have pretty expensive units, but it's not because it's because of redundancy, but it's also because those units do a few other things. So, but for basic needs, it doesn't matter if you have a cheap one or an expensive one.
Okay, we have more questions. Are the atomic clocks calibrated on the control segment, or do they self-calibrate on the satellite? I'm not sure I understand this question.
It is a good question. So the question is, the atomic clocks need to be calibrated every now and then. We need to have someone that makes sure that those clocks are actually accurate. Because if they're not, we just saw that in our picture, if one of those satellites' atomic clock's off, it's going to move those circles around. And so you're absolutely right. It's the control segment of the GPS system that is monitoring the atomic clocks and then sending signals up and telling those atomic clocks they need to be adjusted. You know, and how often they do that, I'm not actually sure. But it is the control segment that's responsible for that. So they'll send up a signal and say, you need to adjust your clock this way. So the control segment is the only segment that communicates back with the GPS satellites. Your GPS receiver does not do that. It's just it's just a receiver, GPS receiver. It's just taking in the information that it's sending out. It's not talking back to it. The control segment is, and they'll be updating everything on the satellites.
Wow, that was very impressive. I am very impressed. Okay, this is a question from Jules. Do you get total global coverage if you are in high or low latitudes, Arctic or Antarctic regions? Does the accuracy change, or does it just stop working?
No, so the system is designed to be used globally. And that's one of the reasons that the satellites are not in a geostationary orbit. They are moving in, what did I say, 6 different orbital planes. So they're constantly moving. So they have full global coverage, and thus the accuracy as a system should be the same there, barring that you don't have any obstruction or like a mountain in your way or something. It should be the same. So it can be used globally, at least the GPS system. I said that some systems, like I know India's launching a system, that's a regional system, and they're using, I believe, geostationary satellites, so they're just above India. So you couldn't use that system on the other side of the globe. But for the 4 systems that I pointed out earlier, they should be able to be used globally.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Did you talk about, that's a question from me, how many satellites there are just for GPS around the planet?
So for GPS, yeah, for GPS it's there's about, I think there's 33 satellites for GPS.
Okay.
And then each country that has its own system has approximately the same amount.
Wow. So there are like hundreds of satellites for...
Yeah, there'd be like 150. But Starlink's launching 3,000 satellites, so it's like nothing.
Wow. Okay, here is another question from Spinogrids. Hi. Do satellites have any synchronization delays between each broadcast so they do not interrupt each other? Man, these are really technical questions.
No, they're operating on their own, like,
how do you know
they're operating on their own frequency. So that's different. It's in the same band, but it's very small frequency differences. So you actually know. I'm going to show you a photo later of a GPS monitor on a chart plotter, and the system can see which satellite number it is, so that they have their independent kind of signals coming down. So there's no bleed over, and that's been thought about, I think, very carefully by the designers. So I'll show you a photo of that here coming up.
Wow.
Is that it for now?
This is very, very technical, but it's fun. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm learning tons. It's really fun. Okay. Mike asks, do the larger Garmin GPS and radar work well?
Say that again?
The Garmin GPS
yeah.
and radar, do they work well?
I have no idea.
No,
I've never used it.
We've never tried
Can't
them.
give a for or against there.
But this is fun because there is actually a little less people in this topic today, so we're really able to answer questions live.
What do we have today?
Yeah, no, it's about 100 people. Yeah. How long before a satellite obsoletes and gets replaced?
Yeah, I think I used to know the answer for this, and I don't right now, but I think they have like a 10-year service life. So they're continually updating, moving new satellites up and down, but they're quite expensive, as you can imagine. But I think that service's life is like 10 to 15 years.
Wow, what happens when they die?
They just burn up in the atmosphere.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of
No,
money.
because there's only so much, like well, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but obviously space is a harsh environment. So they're exposed to a lot of things. The batteries don't last. There's only so much fuel you can put on because they do need to update the orbits. So they have to reposition them slightly every once in a while. So eventually just all of that starts to degrade or goes away and they're just not functional anymore. So then the orbits degrade and they burn up. Okay?
Okay.
Let's carry on.
Let's carry on.
How do I do this? All right, here we go. The techie guy is untechnical right now. Okay, so one of the questions that we had before the live was then, how many satellites do you need? So for us sailors, 3 satellites, as I said, at sea level will probably give you a signal. How good of a signal it is, yet, you know, it's not the greatest. It's not the best geometry, but 3 is what you would need bare bone minimum. In a plane or being in the mountains, 4 is what you're going to need for the 3D picture. And remember, the system should be able to provide up to 12. That's what it's designed for, but there are times just based on geometry of the system or maybe obstructions in the sky that we don't get 12. So 4 required for a 3D picture. Then we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but 5 satellites are going to be required to understand if there's a fault in the system. So if I have 4 satellites, that's great, and it's telling me that I have a position somewhere on the Earth, but I don't know, and my receiver doesn't know if that is actually accurate or not. So it's just saying you're at I don't know, what am I trying to say? You're at the marina, but you might not actually be at the marina because the system has no way of knowing. So it needs 5 satellites to understand if there's some type of a fault. Then it needs 6 satellites to know which satellite is faulty. So to be able to isolate that satellite and then exclude it from the algorithm, it needs 6 satellites to do that. And that's like very in the weeds, but you can see here on the right side of the screen, the first satellite you're going to get is for a time sync. The second's for the latitude. The third is for the longitude. 4th is for altitude, but again, if you're at mean sea level, that's not as critical. And then, as I said, the 5th satellite's for fault detection. 6th is to exclude things, and then any other satellites you have are just bonus. I hope that's clear. Okay, so this is a photo from actually a RAIM, I think the Lighthouse software, where you can see what the GPS or GNSS system is picking up. So in this photo, and hopefully you can see it okay, there's the green dots that are lit up there have numbers, and that's the number of the satellite that it's communicating with. But there's different shapes, and the different shapes correspond to the system that satellite's related to. So the round ones are the GPS. The square ones are SBAS, which we'll talk about in a bit. That's part of the GPS system. GLONASS is the triangle. Galileo is the, I don't know, squared corner, curvy edges. And BEDU is kind of a circle, square, diamond. BEDU, I don't know. So, and then it also shows, if you were to look straight up in the sky, you know, how you would see those. So all the ones that are on the edges of this circle are very low on the horizon and probably are not giving very accurate signals because they are so low. So some systems actually have a thing called a mast angle, and they will exclude satellites below a certain degree below the horizon. So it could be 2.5 degrees or 5 degrees. And that's what that kind of second line is there. So all the ones around the edges aren't very good. It's the ones kind of more in the middle for position data. And you can see here on the side here, it's this H dope. Don't worry about that right now, but the accuracy is 0.3 meters. So that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So I was talking a bit about fault detection and exclusion. So we've figured out our position, but now we need to make sure that that position is actually accurate. And this is a thing called RAIM. It's more prevalent. You hear the word more in aviation because aviation, the position data is so critical. But many of the receivers that you'll find in marine applications, it could be a receiver on, I know like the Raymarine AIS 650, it will say it's a RAIM GPS on it, and you may be like, what is RAIM? I don't know what that means. I'm going to tell you what that means. But RAIM stands for Receiver Autonomous Integrity Monitoring, is what it is. So it's literally just monitoring all of those satellites that are up there. And it's looking for bad geometry of the satellites, so how the satellites are shining down on me, and any clock errors that might be associated with. So I'm going to just explain quickly how this works. Hopefully I explain it in a good way that we're not too confused. So what this does is, remember, I said we need 4 satellites to make up a 3D picture. And once we get those 4 satellites, we still don't know if that picture is actually accurate. We just know we have a position, okay? So you'll see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 satellites that are coming down to make a little point inside this green circle. And that's a position. So what RAIM is doing is it's taking 4 satellites and then finding the position. Then what it does is, remember, we need 5 satellites to know if it's bad. It will take a 5th satellite and in a different combination, so maybe this time we take 1, 2, 3, 4, it tells us that our point is actually here. And then the next time we're going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 satellites, and that's going to tell us our points here and here and here. So it's using different configurations of the satellites, because remember we need 4. So if we have a 5th satellite, we now have a few different configurations we can make to plot different points on the surface of the Earth. And if those points are really close together, we know that we have good information coming down. If those points if we start getting points way outside these circles here, all of a sudden we know, oh wait, something is wrong. We're getting bad information somewhere. And now what we need to do is figure out where that bad information is coming from. Do you think that's clear?
Yeah, actually, I understand.
Yeah. So the system, and this system is all happening inside of our user segment, inside of our phones or inside of our chart plotters. Inside of there, it's taking, so it's just saying, okay, these 4 satellites are telling me I'm here. Now these 4 satellites are telling me, these 4 different configuration satellites are telling me I'm in this other spot. And this configuration is telling me I'm here. Okay, life is good. Or it's going to say life is bad. Okay, great.
Life is bad.
And it may give you a warning and say, oh, the GPS signal is bad, or maybe it just stops displaying the GPS signal. It just depends on your unit. But then, in order for, some units are, if we have 6 satellites, we were talking about that earlier, we're actually able to then narrow down, the system is able to narrow down which satellite is bad, and it can take that away from the algorithm, exclude it, and say, wait, that satellite's bad, we're not going to use that anymore. We're going to carry on with only these satellites because we know that that's bad. But we need 6 satellites in order to do that. If there is a fault with one of the satellites, that goes away. Now we only have 5. So now we only know if there's a problem with one of those 5. So we need another one to come in if there's an exclusion.
Okay, so question directly linked to this. If RAIM detects an errant satellite, does it get permanently excluded?
It will get excluded. So the question was if does it permanently exclude the satellite? It would exclude the satellite from the position data that it's giving the user, but the system will continually check it. So maybe at some point, there's an update or something gets better. It would then pull that back into the calculation of your position once that signal was determined it was accurate. So you don't have to like reset your system after it's excluded a satellite, and like a year later you're like, oh, it's still not including satellite 14. None of us look at that. So the system will continually check it, but for the position information that you're getting, it would exclude it.
Wow.
Is that it?
Yeah. We're having a few questions. Do you want to take a little question break? Okay.
I think so.
So first one, will you be trying, from Mel, will you be trying to mount a SpaceX Starlink dish on Polysil? Yeah, absolutely.
The answer is yes.
If we could.
I'm trying to get into the beta program, so I've registered every address possible to get one shipped to us, and then I want to put it on the boat, even though they say it's only for the northern North America, but
Ryan will go everywhere.
If there's a SpaceX like person on this, which I doubt there is, give us a call.
All right. Stylist asked, what's the lag between position determination and when signal is received by the unit?
It's really, really fast. That's a great question. So really asking, is there a lag between the time the signal is sent from the satellite down to the receiver and then that receiver tells the user information? So it's extremely fast. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it is worth noting that sometimes, and I know I've experienced it, and some of you have too, if you haven't used, let's say your chart plotter inside your yacht for a while, maybe it's been off all winter, or maybe you have actually moved the boat on let's say a trailer, or it's in a different spot from when you shut the GPS off the last time to when you're turning it on. Sometimes it can take the receiver a while to kind of, you could say, warm up. So the information that it had is no longer accurate, and things have moved and maybe things have been updated. So it's going to take it a while to start communicating with satellites and getting its picture back to what's going on in space. And that's why, sometimes after winter, you turn that GPS on, you're like, what is it? Like, is it broken? I know for us, like sometimes I'll sit there for like 10 minutes while it's still trying to figure out what's going on, but it eventually does. So there can be a lag initially, but there shouldn't really be a lag as it gets going.
All right. Mark asks, do you prefer Garmin, Raymarine, or B&G? I can answer that one. We have never tried Garmin or B&G. We have very little experience of those brands. We have Raymarine on board, and it works for us. It's a very old system that we have on board, so we cannot answer that question because we have too little experience.
Yeah, and I would probably stress that from a GPS perspective, I don't think it even matters.
Yeah.
I think from a chart, because those systems are really there just to display the information that the GPS is getting you, which is only your position data.
Yes.
And I'll touch on that here in a little bit, but it's only displaying that. The rest of it is just user interface and how the boat is getting other information, maybe wind information, or how the electronic charts are integrated and displayed to you. But it's from a GPS side, it's no different. So it's just displaying your information from your position data, and that's it. So from a GPS side, I don't think it matters, but from a user side and how you like the system to integrate and how maybe you like the user interface, that's, I think, what matters more.
It's more a question of user experience. It's like asking somebody if they prefer Apple or what is this?
We've had so many technical problems.
I'm gonna turn it off.
It's like a party here.
I think that some neighbor just connected their phone to to the speakers of the office for like 5 seconds, and we had Shakira playing.
All right, any more?
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. It's going to be hard to not laugh historically. But Julian asked, it's a serious question. Is it true that the US military dumbed down the signal to reduce accuracy, or is that fake news?
No, that's a great question. So Sophie Jules just asked, did the military dumb down the accuracy of the GPS signal to, make it less usable to threats, I would say. And the answer is yes, but that's not the case today. So when the system was first online, obviously people understood the potential of GPS and how it was so accurate. But the US, since they made this available, didn't want hostile nations to use it against us. So they added a little bit of degradation into that, and that was a thing called selective availability. So the US could turn certain things off or make the signal not as accurate. But that left the military in charge of things. And, as time progressed, we became more reliant on GPS. So now aircraft are using it, and people with kind of mission critical things that are not military are using it. So I think in 2000, they shut selective availability off. So that's no longer a thing. And the government has to give a 10-year warning before they shut the GPS system off. Now that's in the US. I don't know about the other systems. I'm sure with the Chinese system and the Russian system, there's probably some things built in, probably with the European system too. But yeah, that's what it is. Selective availability, not fake news. It is a real thing, but it no longer exists.
Interesting.
Speaking of that, hold that comment for a second. We can talk a bit about accuracy. So the level of accuracy that that was a good segue. The level of accuracy that the GPS system should be giving you is plus minus 13 meters 95% of the time. But we saw that on that RAIM marine chart that I showed you, that we had 0.3 meters there. So it can be much more accurate than that, but this is the stated accuracy of it. It's pretty good. 13 meters is good since we're getting signals from satellites flying around in space, but obviously we can get much better than that. And we can do that through a thing called augmentations, or GNSS augmentations. So what is an augmentation? What the heck is that? And really what it is it's a way to augment or correct some of the signal errors that we have in the GNSS system. And a lot of this has to do with interference that we get from the ionosphere. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but we have a bunch of errors that are built into the signal, and that's why it's only stated at plus minus 13 meters. And there's a few types of augmentations we can use. We can use a space-based augmentation system. We can use a ground-based, so that's a space-based is an SBAS type system. We can use a ground-based system, or a GBAS, or we can use like some type of internal augmentation system. For us sailors, we don't want to be using ground-based augmentation systems, or probably we won't most of the time, because we want to be away from the land, we want to be on the water. So in this discussion, we'll strictly talk about space-based. And again, as with GNSS, there's many types of SBAS systems out there. So for instance, the US system is called WAAS, which stands for Wide Area Augmentation System. The European system is EGNOS, and then we have a Russian system, and the Indian system, GAN. So there's a few systems out there that make up SBAS as a whole, so it's just important to understand that. So how does SBAS work? So what the system does is it's going to launch we take 2 more or 3 more satellites and we launch them up into space, but these satellites are going to go into geostationary orbit. And the reason they're in geostationary is that we are only providing coverage. So for instance, in the US system, we're only providing coverage for this area, this WAAS area, okay? So those want to be right over North America there. So we have these two systems up. And then what we're going to do for this system, I don't know how well you can see this at home, but this is kind of the ground control system of the SBAS system. And all these yellow dots that you see scattered across North America are, you can think of them as like little GPS receivers on the ground. So they're little ground reference stations. And what they do is when they place those ground reference stations there, they take really, really, really precise measurements of that ground reference station. So they know exactly on the chart datum where that thing is. So when the station in Aurora, Illinois is on and it's picking up the GPS system, that ground reference station is saying, well, I am right here, but the GPS is telling me that I'm actually right here. So there's an error, something's off a little bit. So we need to correct the signal and move it back just a little bit. So the Aurora ground reference station sends that to the master control station, and they send that update all the way up to these other WASP satellites, these geostationary satellites that are just hovering around North America. And then those satellites will send a correction signal back down to your user segment, to your phone or to your chart plotter. But the thing is, these devices have to be able to take an SBAS signal or a WASP signal. So that's essentially how it works. It's just a correction signal. So we put a bunch of units on the ground. They're going to tell the master control station, well, the signal's not really right. We need to add this much correction to it. They shoot that correction up, and then it comes down into your receiver. And that's how the SBAS or an augmentation system works. The same type of thing works with GBAS. There's some other ways to augment it, but I think that's a bit outside of the scope of this presentation. But for us sailors, SBAS can be a thing, and a lot of our receivers come with SBAS already installed, but it kind of carries on to the question, do more expensive receivers, are they more accurate? Well, in this case, if we have to spend a little bit more to have an SBAS or an augmented system enabled receiver, those might be more expensive than one that's not. So that is a case where we could spend a little bit more money and get a little bit higher accuracy.
I don't even understand how you know all those things. This is crazy. It's super interesting, though. I'm loving it. Personal comment here.
So we said 13 meters 95% of the time for unaugmented GNSS. The listed accuracy then, if we augment the system, is about 2 to 3 meters, but obviously we're going to get really, really accurate stuff. I mean, we can go down to just like probably like 1/10 of a meter. So 10 centimeters in accuracy, that's not unheard of, and the military applications are even more precise than that. So this is super accurate stuff. These are just the listed accuracies. And I need to check on something here. Sorry guys, I'm just gonna flip through. Yeah. So I made a note here at the bottom. It's really important though that if you have a GNSS system that has some type of augmentation in it, that if you're not in a zone where there is augmentation available, that you disable it. And I don't know why I put this slide so late in the presentation, but I'm fast forward. And these are two examples, again, off a RAIM marine chart plotter. So this is a yacht that is in New Zealand, okay? So if you're looking at this first slide here, we see all the satellites, and these two square ones here, way off on the horizon, are actually the SBAS or the WASP satellites for North America. So we're just barely seeing those on the horizon, okay? And what happens is in this particular case, you can see here the satellite differential fix. So automatic differential is the mode, and the differential would be like an augmentation system in this case. And you'll see here so the system says, oh, well, I'm connected to an SBAS system. This is great. I'm going to be able to get the difference and everything and make the system better. But what's happening here is our accuracy is 2.5 meters, and the HDOP is 4.6. So the system information is not very good, and that's because we're getting updates from the WAS system, but we're so far away that those updates are actually screwing up the information that we're getting, because it's updating things for North America. It's not updating things for us in New Zealand. So if we then go to this next chart, you'll see that we've now turned off the differential or the augmentation, and you can see we have the same geometry of satellites here, but our accuracy goes to 0.3 meters. So by turning off the thing that was supposed to help us, we actually did better. And that's something that you do need to be aware of, is that if you keep that on all the time and you're in a region that the SBAS is not available, that it can screw you up even more. So that's just a cool example.
Okay, Daniel Scott asked, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the military have an issue with the public having absolute accuracy because of national security issues?
Yeah, that's right. So that's again back to the selective availability. So the military did not want to have, initially, it wasn't necessarily us as, well, me as American citizens, or some of you watching, but it was foreign states having the ability to have that type of accuracy. So there's actually two types of signals that come down from the GPS, and one is a PC code, and that's a position something code, and that's what you and I use, okay? So it's like a standard positioning service. There's another code that comes down from the satellites even today, and that's a precise position code, okay? So that's something that only the military has access to. So that's even more precise than that GPS signal that you and I are allowed to access with our phones or our chart plotters. So the military has a special encrypted code that they're able to tap into the satellites and get an even more precise and accurate position.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have a comment here. For your information, when Putin rides past our office in Moscow, all phones' GPS location immediately switch to the nearest airport. Something to do with drone prevention. I found that comment amazing.
Let's get into that. That's a great segue.
We actually have a lot of really good questions too.
Okay, let's do that now then.
Yeah, just so that we don't keep them all the way to the end. But let me see. Do you monitor for K-index while out on the water?
Can we save that question for a little bit?
Okay. Here's another one. Do you see inertial navigation equipment from aviation finding its way in marine application, or increasing accuracy of satellite navigation negates need for it?
Okay, so the question is internal navigation. Do we see that? Do I see that coming on board smaller boats and aiding in augmentation or GPS systems? And so for those who aren't familiar, a lot of aircraft and even big ships have big internal navigation systems. So what it is you have a big box and there's these gyros spinning around on different axes, and they're spinning, and every time the ship or the aircraft moves, those gyros move, and there's lasers inside that are looking at those gyros. And so if you know where you start the day, so a lot of aircraft, when they're at the gate, before they leave, there's a very precise position at the gate, and the pilots know what it is, and they type it into their flight computer, and now the internal navigation system knows, okay, I'm starting here. If I bank a little bit like this for this long, and if I pitch up and I down, this is where I'm going to be. It's just like if you turn left or right, and you keep track of that in your mind, then you know I'm this far down the street. These systems are really expensive. They're really heavy. They're fairly accurate, but they typically need to be updated every now and then because there's physics and friction and drift and all kinds of things. I don't see those types of systems going on board the yachts that you and I take out because there's really no point. The GPS system will do pretty good. It's extremely reliable, and now that there's other systems up there, there's just so much redundancy. There are some issues, which is the next part of the presentation, but overall it's there. Now, that said, the general principles of what goes on using those internal navigations is already finding its way onto boats. So if you've seen our video on our new autopilot that we put on, there was this EV1 sensor, this little disc, and inside of that there was a bunch of accelerometers and things, and those are on different axes. And while that's not necessarily giving us position data, it's helping out the autopilot be a little bit more reactive and a little bit more accurate in how it helms a boat. It's still running off those basic principles of internal navigation. So maybe we'll see more of that coming in the autopilot side, and maybe we'll see some basic systems. I know there's, in some of the chart plotting systems, there's some like attitude reference systems. I'm not sure the actual name that they use, but that can be incorporated. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
I cannot help you on this. You're
Sophie,
the expert.
help me.
I'm like, oh my God.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, there are like questions coming up all the time, but some people are asking about antennas, and Henry, who was sailing this weekend apparently, asked if we mentioned that GPS antennas have a battery inside, so when you have problem, you first check if the battery in your antenna is okay. I did not know that.
Did not know that, and that could be related to some antennas and other. I don't think the ones that we have a battery, because it gets power from the cable, but yeah, sure, some of them might. So it's important to check that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how about GPS external antennas? Are there differences between them?
I don't think so, really. You just need to make sure it's compatible with the unit that you're using. So I can't take my RAIM GPS antenna and probably plug it into my phone here.
No.
I don't think that would work. And it's probably the same, and I know even like the older RAIM antennas won't work on the newer like RAIM chart plotters. I'm sure that's the same with some of the other brands. So that is something that's important to check, is to make sure that there's compatibility. And that has to do with how the signal goes through the cable and how the chart plotter interprets that, or the NMEA system interprets that. So that would be something you need to check on. Otherwise, I think the principles of those receivers are all the same. Yeah.
Cool. Atukora asked if there is a Google Maps for sailing that tracks the GPS coordinates of obstacles that might pose a threat to the yacht.
Well, I think that would just be like the electronic chart that you have. So
I would have, that's like, isn't it the job of a radar?
Yeah, so I don't know. This is okay, this is a good time to maybe explain this. I got a little itch on my nose, sorry. The GPS itself, the GPS itself is only telling you position data. That's the only thing it's telling you. So even though we can get speed over ground from the GPS, it's not like there's not like a little man in the the satellite pointing a speed gun at you. That's not how that works. So the only thing that the GPS tells you is where you are, and where you are on a datum. So we use this system called, you might see it on some of the charts, WGS 84. So in 1984, this big chart datum came out and said, this is how we're going to use the grid system, and this is how the grid systems align with the Earth. So the only thing that GPS does is says that you are at this latitude and this longitude. That's it. Okay, then it's up to the system that's receiving that signal to do other things with it. So for instance, on our chart plotter, we're going to get the GPS signal. We're going to get the GPS signal in, and then that chart plotter also has some electronic charts. So some company has gone off, or maybe the government has gone off and charted out where all these little obstacles are. Same thing with like Google Maps, big map of the city, and that's all related to this chart datum that we have too. And it's just going to display that information and our position information from the GPS at the same time. So that's what that system is doing. Then with relation or with reference to speed, what it's doing then is it's saying, well, right now at this second, I'm at this point. Now at the next second, I'm at this point. At the next second, I'm this point. Next second, I'm at this point. And from that, it can figure out your speed over the ground and your true course over the ground. So the GPS satellites aren't sending down some things saying you're going 5 knots, or as Polar Seal goes, 9 knots. No, I wish. It doesn't do that. So it's just giving position information, and then yes, like your chart plotter would have map information on it. It would help calculate the speed. It would help calculate the true course. So that's what it does. Sophie's fixing this camera issue that we have. God, we've been so full of technical problems today.
It's okay, it's okay. We're just rolling it. I'm still laughing at the Shakira, the Shakira song that.
So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, it's all about the charts that you use, and then the little ship on the chart plotter just gets displayed over that. And if the charts are made incorrectly, then that's why sometimes like the little island, and people complain about it. The island is not in the right spot. It shouldn't have anything to do with the GPS. It has everything to do with the charting. So somebody made a chart.
Cool.
Hope that answers the question.
All right. Do you want to continue, or do you want to take a question?
Let's finish up. We're almost done here, and then we can take questions at the end. Yeah? How's that sound?
You decide.
Let's do it. Okay. So finally, we've alluded to some of these before, but the GPS isn't perfect. The GNSS isn't perfect. We have some errors, and this is a list of all the errors, and we're just going to talk about a few of them. But the clock error, we talked about that earlier. So the clocks can be off. So if we're not, for some reason, getting right clock information, that can obviously throw us off, and we saw that with how GNSS works. The position or ephemeris data. Man, I'm so bad at some of this. Ephemeris data. So if that's off, the position data is off, obviously our information would be wrong. One of the big problems that we actually have is a thing called ionospheric and tropospheric delay. So in this chart, or in this graph here, we have the world, and obviously we have different layers of the atmosphere. And one of those layers is the ionosphere, and the other layer is the troposphere. So if we shoot a signal through there, it's kind of like looking through water a little bit with refraction. This is just a little different physics-wise, but we send that signal there. The ionosphere and the troposphere can actually distort the signal a little bit, and when that happens, obviously then, so in a perfect world, if you see my little laser pointer, when the satellite sends the signal down, in a perfect world, it would just send it in a straight line down here, okay? But because we have interference in the ionosphere and the troposphere, the line starts kind of squiggling. And obviously, if that line squiggles a lot, it takes a farther path, so the distance is a little bit longer. And that's then and if all the satellites are doing that, that's gonna throw our position off some. And that's where SBAS comes in. So we were talking about SBAS a little bit ago. SBAS is there to correct for a few things, and this is one of them. That interference from the atmosphere will be figured out or determined by those little ground reference stations, and they're saying, well, it's not telling me the right spot. We need to add a correction. So it's correcting for these types of interference. And here's just now the ionospheric and tropospheric interference is better and worse in some areas than others. So this is just a chart that shows some of that a lot of the equatorial regions that where the atmosphere is a bit thicker. You're going to have more of those errors than you might have at the poles or in the mid latitudes. So just something to be aware of. But if you have these augmentation systems, it could be why, you know, if you are in the tropics area, that maybe you're noticing that your GNSS accuracy is a bit lower. So that's the ionospheric and tropospheric delay. We talked about the clock error. There are some latency issues, so there can be some delays in things, and then some system noise. Multipath is really just happens in cities and maybe in big mountainscape areas where the signals can actually reflect off of buildings. and that can cause some confusion with the signal, and then general interference. I will say that I think that, yeah, and this is a chart I showed earlier, but I will say that that we got a question about the K index, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you monitor the K index while you are out on the water?
So K index is something that has to do with the amount of solar. I'm not gonna say this right, but it's a solar.
Solar flares?
No, it's like the solar ions, I guess, that are being shot out by like the sun.
Wow.
And they can cause interference with satellites. So if there's a big sunspot or there's a big solar flare on part of the sun, which these happen all the time, but if there's a part of the sun and it shoots out a bunch of, I don't know if it's ions or like what it is. Well, it shoots out a bunch of stuff from the sun, and it's not good for electrical equipment. So if it gets shot out at just the right point as the sun is doing its thing and the Earth's going around it, it can essentially hit our little environment that we've built in space of satellites, and it can essentially knock everything out in a worst case scenario. In just a minor case, it can maybe just cause some degradation to one or two satellites. It really just depends. But you know, I think back in the 70s, there was a big
solar wind.
Yeah, it creates solar wind, but I don't think that's the ions.
Aren't it the flares?
No, but the flares create it, but they shoot out some like ions.
Okay, okay. Well,
I'm not a solar expert here.
If you know what we're talking about.
I didn't prepare for the solar conversation. But anyway, so it shoots us out. I think back in the 70s there was a big solar flare, and it knocked out like power on the whole west coast of the US or something. It took down like whole power systems. So it can be really dangerous, and K-index is something that there's actually a space weather department that NASA has, and they do weather forecasting because of these things, and K-index is one of the things that they forecast and tell. So generally the K-index is fairly low. It's not going to cause any problems. We don't monitor it. I know of nobody that monitors it. Even in aviation, I didn't monitor K-index. But there are some applications where we would, and it's mainly for like extremely mission critical things, which I know we all feel that our boats are mission critical, and they are, but not to that level of accuracy. So, yeah.
Wow, that went deep.
That went super deep. Yeah.
Okay, you want to take another question?
Yeah, because I'm pretty much done because we've answered all my other side stuff. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Good job.
I just spilled water all over me, and you got that on film.
Doing great today. Doing great. Just think about it.
You know, I have to say, to the setup that we have, it takes me a while to put it up. In the last few lives that we've done, there's always been a problem that's taken me a while. And today, it just like got set up perfect, and it all worked. And I said to myself, there's going to be some stuff going wrong. And it's all like, we've had audio issues, and the camera's crapping.
And Shakira was just over the top. Okay. Christopher asked, can you manually adjust your boat's position, like at the dock or other known position on your chart plotter for better accuracy based on the super accurate GPS signal position?
No, not that I'm aware of. You can do that, no. I think that that's probably a good thing. Because if you adjust it and then don't hit the right button or something, and then that's not good. So no, I am not aware of a system that does that.
All right. Going back to K-index, Quick Dry, who clearly is a GPS expert.
Oh, okay.
Like he's been popping in and out in the chat with like super expert comments. I was very impressed.
Great.
But said, I don't know what his job is, but we monitor for K-index on drones, but we're usually in closer contact to people/buildings.
Yeah, that's actually right, because my latest deal with K-index was I actually have a client that's working with some drones, and the K-index conversation came up, and we had to put some provisions in there for that. So yeah, I think, but that's a mission critical thing. You're in like a very confined area, and there's potentially humans underneath the drone, and you don't want things.
And
going
then all
bad.
of a sudden, the sun decides to do something.
Exactly, and your
and
drone like takes off because it gets the wrong position data.
Wow.
Exactly. So.
Okay, Atikora asked, are charts continuously updated?
That is yes. The answer is yes. But so typically the state that's responsible for the waters there does the updating, and then chart suppliers get that information. They might take that, and like the U.S. NOAA publishes their own charts. You can get them raster formats, kind of like PDFs, or chart suppliers take that information and make their own digital charts. So Navionics is like constantly updating their digital charts, which is one thing that's really nice. Other nations maybe don't do the best surveying. So I know we hear a lot of complaints about how well the charts are in the Pacific in certain areas. And I do know some chart suppliers will take sonar data from boats that record it, and they will integrate that in their charts. So you can actually have that sonar data, which is nice. So that's kind of like crowdsourced depth information. But yeah, some areas of the world, the charts are great. The charting is awesome. In other parts, it's maybe not so much. But yeah, they are updated quite often, yeah.
All right, so there is one last question, and I think that if it's good for you, we can wrap it up. Guys, if you have any question, now is the time, because I think we're running a little low on questions, and I think that we're reaching the end of the topic. But Danielle asked if there is a way to know when, time of the day, a particular satellite is in a good position to calibrate the electronics.
I don't think it really matters, because you should always have enough satellites in view. So you just need to turn the unit on if it hasn't been on for a while, and just understand it could take a little bit of time. Or if you've moved positions with the unit, with your receiver. So I don't think that's, I don't even know how you'd find that information. So it kind of doesn't really matter, I would say.
Cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, you know what, wait, let me just refresh, because I've had little issues with the internet, so I'm just going to refresh the chat to
we'll
make
wait
sure.
a second. While Sophie does that, I'm going to do my thanks. We'll see if there's any other questions, but I do want to.
There is not.
Okay, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been really fun. This is actually some of the stuff I teach professionally on the side, so it's great. If you have any other questions, just feel free to either shoot an email, or you can add the comments here after the video is posted. We do take a lot of time to put these videos together, so if you do feel like supporting us or helping out, you can either leave it in the super chat, or there's donate button on our website. Yeah, other than that, if you have ideas for lives, please feel free to shoot them our way. I'm thinking the next live we might do how radar works. That was a discussion topic.
Oh yeah, I want to know that.
So we might do that, or if we can get this video that we keep talking about getting out on the alternator,
I'd like
to get that.
I'd like
to get that video out and then do a follow-up live regarding that video. I think that would be really fun. So, but if you have any other topics, I think I've convinced Sophie also to do a Sophie live.
I'm just so unclear what topic I would cover. I have zero technical knowledge.
No, but you need to, it doesn't just need to be technical knowledge. I think it needs to be Sophie knowledge.
Okay.
I don't know. You guys help me out here.
What was I going to say? Yes, and thank you for bearing with us while we were dealing with a lot of technical issues today.
Yeah, we are eventually gonna turn this live. This one we're gonna, I think, do our own tech video just on this topic.
Yeah,
so hopefully it's clear and really well done, because I think it's interesting and people would enjoy it.
Thanks, Yolanda. We get a super chat. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that this video, this is going to be the worst live to replay, to watch after. Yes, I think that we should totally make it into a fun video.
Yeah, we will. So again, thanks guys. If you have anything else or questions, comments, or even some feedback on things we should try to do differently, drop us it. Let us know. It's great. But for now, anything left?
Yeah, Jules was suggesting a fishing lure manufacturing. How about a machine gun?
Jeez. All right. Okay, Jules, thank you for that.
Yeah, just to explain that little private joke, Jules was on our boat. We sailed between the Canaries and Cape Verde together, and we fished a lot, and we were very successful. A little too successful, it's in a video if you're interested.
All right, guys. Well, happy Sunday. I think in the U.S. it's holiday tomorrow, so enjoy your day off, and well, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.